So good morning, everybody. I'm Lori Arthur Carmichael. I'm from IT Training and Support, and today we're going to be talking about Zoom using the whiteboard feature. So on our agenda, we will be talking about devices to support whiteboarding that are available. Then we'll look at verifying your annotation, whiteboard, and sharing settings in the Zoom web portal. Then we'll look at starting the whiteboard feature in a meeting, and then enabling or disabling the whiteboard and annotation feature in a meeting. Then using the whiteboard and annotation in a meeting. And then at the end, we'll have some hands-on practice using the whiteboard and annotation. And then, of course, questions if you have any. So we do have a couple of different devices to support whiteboarding. One of them is if you have an iPad, we have Apple Pencils that are available for that. Because if you're trying to do drawing on a whiteboard, it's very difficult to do with a mouse. And so I definitely recommend that you have something like the Apple Pencil if you're comfortable with an iPad. Or if you prefer to use a laptop or a computer, we do have Wacom tablets and pens that are available. And essentially they do the same thing. It provides a little surface for you to navigate, but also to draw on as well if you're using a whiteboard. And at the end of the class, I'll be sending you an email that indicates like, here's where you can go for those device requests. I'll send you this PowerPoint presentation, a couple other resources as well. So now we're going to look at verifying your annotation settings in the Zoom web portal. So I'm going to go over here. So of course, to get into your Zoom web portal, there's a lot of different ways. One of the easiest is if you log into the portal, you can search for Zoom. It's actually called Web Meetings, but it'll come up even if you put in Zoom. That will take you to the Zoom web page. Lots of information on here, lots of resources, but you'll be going to click on CSUF Zoom Sign In. And then once you're in your Zoom web portal, you're going to go to Settings. There's a lot of settings, and it's basically one long page, but you can jump to a particular section. I'm going to jump to In Meeting Basic, and then I'm going to keep scrolling because the options that I want are a little bit further down. So you'll see for annotation and whiteboard, we do actually enable this for everybody. However, there's a couple of other settings that you may want to come in here and think about using or enabling before your meetings. So for example, annotation. This allows you or your students to annotate any screen. So at the moment, you can see my little laser pointer. That's part of the annotation. So you can annotate any shared screen in Zoom. It doesn't actually have to be a whiteboard. And turning this on enables that feature. What we did do, though, is we did choose only the user who is sharing can annotate as a default option, meaning that I would be the only person who could annotate in my meeting here, since I'm the one who's sharing. I uncheck this because within a meeting, you can either enable or disable this for your participants. So like at the moment, I've disabled this for this meeting. I'll be turning it on later so that you can practice with it. But I want to be able to allow my students, or my participants to annotate. So I need to make sure this is turned off. I also have the allow saving of shared screens annotations. That gives me a save button so that I can take a screenshot basically of any annotations that are on my shared screens. And again, you don't have to necessarily save those, but I like having that option. Likewise with whiteboard, we do enable the whiteboard and we allow the saving of whiteboard content, meaning that there's a save button. I also enable this option, which is auto save whiteboard content when sharing is stopped. I like this because maybe I'm going to forget to hit save, but as soon as I stop the share, if there's anything annotation on the whiteboard, it will actually save, in this case, images of anything that's on the whiteboard. Now, I don't have to use those. I can just kind of leave them where they are, but I like having that option. You can also save them as a PDF. I haven't really tried this out. I would be a little wary of this because depending on how big your image is, when you send it to a PDF, it can kind of shrink it or it might put it over a couple of pages. I would recommend saving as an image because with an image, you can save it as a PDF. You can actually translate it into one, especially if you use, we have Snagit is a screen capturing software that we have available for everybody on campus. And that allows you to open up an image and you can annotate it. You can save it as a PDF. You can save it in other different formats as well. So I like saving as an image, but you can use whichever one it works for you. The other thing to keep in mind is screen sharing. So the way that we're going to create a whiteboard for our meetings is through the screen sharing. So if I have it set so only the host can share, then that means that if I have participants, like my students are going to do a presentation, and I want them to share their screen or they want to share a whiteboard, they won't be able to do that. Now, this is something that I can turn off and on during the meeting. So even though I have it enabled as host only right now, I can actually change it under the security setting, and I can change it so that all participants can share. So this one, I can toggle on and off in a meeting. These other ones, I can't. So I have to make sure that these settings are done before I start a meeting. Once I've started a meeting, if I wanted to now enable that only the user who is sharing can annotate, I would have to end this meeting, make this change, and then start the meeting again. So you may just want to look at this and maybe even some of these other options that are available here and make sure that you know which settings do you want for your class. And they may be different for different classes. You may have different settings based on you being in a meeting yourself versus a class that you're teaching. So you can enable and disable this right before a meeting. That absolutely works. You just need to make sure that you do that before you start the meeting. All right, so once you have your whiteboard settings enabled, to start a whiteboard, you'll choose Share Screen, you'll choose Whiteboard, and then Share. Now, at the moment, as I mentioned, the annotation options in the meeting, I've turned them off for participants. So once I start my whiteboard or start my share even, I can go here to More, and then I can disable or enable participants annotation. So that's where I can toggle it off and on. By default, it is enabled. So typically what I do for my training classes is I arrive in the meeting about 30 minutes beforehand, so I can change any little settings, I can do testing, make sure everything that I'm going to be using in that class is working. And one of the things I do is I start a screen share, I come here and I disable the participants annotation. So that way, when people start joining, they don't automatically have access to the annotation, but I can go in there and just toggle it back on again. There's also an option to show the names of your annotators. I definitely recommend this, just so that you can see who's putting what on the screen. When you save the whiteboard or your annotated screen, it's not going to tell you who did what at that point. It's just a flat image. But while the annotation is happening, you can actually see who is doing what. So the toolbar that's available to you, this is for the whiteboard, but also for any kind of shared screen. You will have this annotation toolbar. So that's what I have right now that I'm using. So the host has a different toolbar than the participant. There's a lot of overlap between what hosts and participants can do, but like this laser pointer that I'm using right now, that's only available for the host. It's not something the participants have access to. So select here. This allows me to toggle back and forth between actually using my mouse or using one of these options. Text, as it implies, allows me to create some text here. Draw, you'll notice the draw option has a lot of sub options here. So you have lines that you can use, you've got arrows, you've got shapes. There's also these what are selection sort of tools. So what that would end up looking like is if you want to highlight something, it kind of does that. And then of course, drawing is just a line or an arrow. Next to that, we have stamps. And these are pre-built stamps. So I'm going to put them right here. There's an arrow, there's a check mark, there's an X, a star, a heart, and a question mark. So I can't really change any of these. I can't make them bigger. I can't change the color. They're just built-in stamps. But I kind of like these if you want to have something like on your whiteboard, maybe you put 3 different sentences and you want them to put a check mark next to every sentence that they think is grammatically correct and an X next to anything that they think is not grammatically correct. It's a nice and easy way for them to just sort of annotate very quickly, and you can tell who did what. And then that way you're not having to have them write or text or anything like that. They can just put a quick little notation next to something. Oh, and with the text, you can actually copy and paste things into your text. I should mention that. So for example, let's say that I did have those 3 sentences. I had them in Microsoft Word. When I open up the whiteboard, I can just open up the text box and just paste my text into it. Because otherwise, the one drawback of the whiteboard is you can't set it up ahead of time, really. You have to wait until the meeting has started and then create your whiteboard. But if you have everything that you want to put in the whiteboard, in Word, as I said, you can copy and paste it in there. That's absolutely fine. And then next to stamp is Spotlight. And I have 2 options. I have this laser pointer. I also have this arrow. And this arrow is actually what participants have. They just have this little arrow here. Then you have Eraser. And I like the eraser in here because unlike other erasers where you kind of have to move your mouse back and forth to erase something completely, this, you just click on it anywhere and it just deletes it. It's very nice. Next, you have Format, and this allows you to change the color of your text, of your drawings. Allows you to change your font size to be a little bit bigger or to put bold or italicized. Typically what you want to do is go to Format first to change the color or etc. and then open up either text or draw. So let's say that I wanted to have blue text now. Let me change my mouse. There we go. Blue text. There we go. So now it's blue. Should also change these too. And then next to that, of course, undo. Undoes the last thing that you just did. Redo, redoes it again. With clear, I really like the clear options here because with the clear, I have the option to clear all of the drawings, or just my drawings, or just my viewers' drawings. So again, if I have 3 sentences that I put there for the students to kind of review, I have them annotate, I can clear just their drawings without removing any of my stuff once I'm done, and then I can say, okay, so now we're going to talk about which of these sentences is right, and etc. Or I can clear everything. So I'm going to go ahead and clear everything here. So that's the toolbars that are available here. For participants, their clear is only ever going to involve their own drawings. So they'll be able to clear their own drawings. They won't be able to clear anybody else's. So when participants need to annotate, it takes a couple seconds to find that option. So for a host, when you start screen sharing, the annotate is just a button that's up in your main toolbar there, and it's very easy to find. For a participant, they have to click View Options and then Annotate. So you want to make sure that your students know where to find that annotate because their annotation toolbar will not show up by default. They have to select it and then it will show. But again, you have to enable annotation in order for them to be able to see that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly stop the share so that I can share the whiteboard. And I'm going to allow participants to annotate. So you are welcome to go ahead and start annotating on here. And you'll notice that when you can type in, this is the first page. You can have multiple pages on your whiteboard. So you might be able to see it a little bit down here at the bottom. There is a plus sign. So like this is my first page of the whiteboard. I can create a second one and say this is the second page. Perfect. Yeah, see, it's very easy to just add something here and then you can go back and forth between the pages. I haven't seen anything from Zoom that indicates how many whiteboard pages you can have in a single meeting, but you might want to try to limit it just a little bit just so you're not confusing yourself or your students too much during the session. But as I have autosave on, as soon as I stop the share and I end the meeting, all of these annotations would be saved. So I don't have to purposely click save. But if you do click save, it does actually save it and it puts it into a folder on your desktop, usually under Documents. So as you can see, it's pretty simple. The other thing to keep in mind is that if I stop this share right now, and then I share it again, and I go back to the whiteboard, it's still here. So within the same session, your whiteboard will persist, which is very nice. But once you end your meeting, the whiteboard is cleared out, and that's why it's going to save everything that you've done there. And that's why it's waiting until I actually end the meeting to save any of this, because it's waiting to see how many of these that I actually have.